As behooves a country with a strong sense of its own exceptionalism, America's radio waves are markedly different from ours. Perhaps the biggest difference? The plethora of conservative voices denouncing liberalism, socialism, feminism, and all other isms that question what they see as the foundational rightness and greatness of America. One of those voices belongs to Dennis Prager. Beyond his syndicated radio talk show, he's also the author of many books and founder of the YouTube-based Prager University. It does not offer degrees, but it claims to be a place where one is, quote, free to learn. And with that, we welcome Dennis Prager to our studio. It's great to have you here.
Steve, thanks for having me.
This sounds like a pickup line, but you come here often? Canada?
I do, in fact. I have been to 9 of the 10 provinces, and I am a big Canada fan.
Great.
I am.
I do remember, this is probably going back 25 years, William F. Buckley came to Canada to give a speech, and he tells this story of coming up to the border, and the border guard says to him, "So what is the purpose of your visit, sir?" And he says, "I've come to desocialize Canada." And I wonder if that's part of your rationale for your visit as well.
That's a very interesting question. That would be a Buckley answer. I have come to announce that there is something totalitarian in not allowing people to smoke cigars even in a cigar store. That has actually transcended LA. In LA, you are allowed to smoke a cigar in a cigar lounge. That you can't hear and that people accept it is troubling.
We are very retrograde in that regard, aren't we?
Retrograde is not the word I'd use. I would say you're coercive.
Well, how off-putting do you find being in a, generally speaking, a liberal welfare state in Canada? How off-putting is that to your normal sensibilities?
Not much. You and Australia have a lot in common in this way. It's a nanny state. Both in Sydney, they told me that you are fined, and maybe it's true here. I wouldn't be surprised. Are you fined here by the amount of garbage you put out? If you put out over a certain amount, are you penalized?
Not that I know.
Well, they are in Sydney, so you have something to learn. But my reaction to both countries is similar. I really like the people. I love coming here, and you're a nanny state, and it's too bad. It's sad because the energy that would be liberated from Canadians in a freer country would be remarkable.
We have had conservative governments here now for almost 10 years.
That's right.
Hasn't made a difference?
Apparently, in that, I think it's made a bigger difference to the extent that I know in foreign affairs.
That is true. That is definitely true, especially vis-a-vis the Middle East. Well,
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we really wanted to have you here today is I think Canadians look with both astonishment and fascination at the American political scene, particularly the Republican Party, which is going through just a phenomenal race for president right now. I think there's 145 candidates running.
146 as of 4 o'clock.
As of 4 o'clock, running for the Republican presidential nomination. So if I can, I want to go through some of the bigger names with you. We'll go through the list, and let's go in inverse order here, because I think Real Clear Politics does the polling. And at 1.3%, this is a guy who's been in the Senate for a long time from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. What do you think of him?
I actually have a great deal of admiration for him. He's extremely bright. I also think, and I very rarely use this with anyone, let alone politicians, he's deep. The man actually thinks through issues. It's clear that he does. On foreign affairs, he's peerless. He understands what is happening, and he believes in what I believe in, fighting evil, which is why I left the left, because the left fights carbon emissions, not evil. So Lindsey Graham is great on that, but he doesn't really stand a chance.
There is one woman in the race, and she tracks in at 1.8% right now.
Right.
This is the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard, Fiorina, also from California, where I guess you know her.
I know her rather well. I was the MC at her senatorial campaign headquarters the night that she lost. One should not have me as MC at these things. I've never been at a winner's. No. I said fine things, but I don't know if I bring good karma. Although there's not possible to bring good karma to a Republican in California, so it's easier to split seas and have the Israelites walk through the land. But she's terrific. She is bright. She gets, in my opinion, what America is about. And needless to say, although she does not emphasize it, a woman would undo this, what I think is a childish appeal of voting for a woman if you're a woman. I find that demeaning to women, but nevertheless, Carly Fiorina would help undo that advantage of Hillary Clinton.
At 2.0% is Rick Santorum, former two-term senator from Pennsylvania, has run for president before. What do you think of him?
Rick Santorum is another good man. I don't think Rick Santorum has much of a chance. I'm a little surprised that he's running. I like him. I campaigned for him in Pennsylvania. But I think that his appeal is a bit too narrow.
The governor of Ohio, John Kasich, is running.
Yes.
You know him?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but all the governors stand a good chance because governors are regarded, I think, more highly than senators. They run something, and they have to appeal to people of the other party. It's very hard in Ohio to win as a Republican if you don't appeal to Democrats.
And yet he did.
That's right.
3.0%, Rick Perry, former governor of Texas,
Yes.
didn't have too much fun the last time he ran for president.
Well, it was unfair. Everybody, including myself, who does public work, has a memory lapse of some point they wish to make, that was somehow used to demean his intelligence was just intellectually dishonest. Rick Perry has run the most successful if not the most, among the most successful states in America during a very bad economic time. That's not little. So he deserves more respect than he gets. That's all I'm saying.
Donald Trump, enough said. He's running. He's in the race again.
Right.
Sort of.
It has to be a sort of an exercise in narcissism. I have nothing more to say.
Christie, governor of New Jersey, 4.8% at the moment.
Yeah, I don't see how far he can go. And here, again, this is just one man. I don't know what he stands for, and that's not a good sign. If it's my living to know what goes on in politics and international affairs, as it is yours. If I don't know what a front-running Republican stands for, I don't think I'm alone.
How about utterly blunt in the way he addresses issues?
Yes, utterly blunt is style, not what you stand for.
Not content. Okay. Well, I don't suspect you're going to have that same problem with this next guy. The junior senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, who comes in at 7.5%. He's sort of the darling of a lot of different people right now. What do you think of him?
Ted Cruz, who I believe Alan Dershowitz of Harvard Law School, who is a liberal and lifelong Democrat, said was the most brilliant student he ever had at Harvard. This guy is very bright. His downside is a somewhat dour demeanor. My theory, it's not mine, but I heard it and I don't know who to attribute it to. The happier candidate always wins.
And he doesn't seem like a happy.
No, he needs to laugh. He needs to smile more.
The runner-up from last time, Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, 8.8%. He's back in the race again.
Mike Huckabee is the opposite in that way of Cruz. He's appealing to the same base. He was a governor, not a senator. He is very charming. I have been with him a lot, and he has television experience, given his show on Fox News, and so I think he's a dark horse.
Rand Paul, 8.8%, the current senator from Kentucky. This guy's an interesting fellow, isn't he?
Well, interesting is always a euphemism for other feelings that people have. I don't like him.
Well, he's different from...
He's the only one that I could not support.
Because?
On two grounds. One, he has a semi-isolationist view of American foreign affairs because he's an avid libertarian. I love libertarians on economic matters, and I have no respect for them on international matters. If there were an honest-to-goodness genocide, the Libertarian Party would say, though America is the strongest country in the world, it owes millions of tortured people, murdered people, nothing. I don't believe in that. I am a religious person, and I take the obligation to help my fellow man seriously. Can we help every fellow man? Of course not. But it's a little stupid to argue that because you can't help everyone, you help no one. I also do not agree, and I'm sure most of your viewers don't agree with me on this. I do want the National Security Agency to monitor through their computers. I want them to monitor phone calls to find terrorists.
He does not.
Oh, he is the most adamant we are now emasculating our ability to find terrorists who blow up innocent human beings. And the argument that it's for liberty is just nonsense. No one's liberty has been in any way compromised because of billions of phone calls running through computers. No one is listening to my phone. No one. Google knows far more about me than the NSA. And I say yes, so does Rand Paul, or he has a smartphone. He says yes. Is it okay if we know your phone and where you are and da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da-da, and you go yes so that the app will work? Mm-hmm. That's infinitely more involved in your life than the NSA.
Help us understand this one. Ben Carson is a doctor. He's never been in politics before, never run for anything before. He's running for president now.
Right.
He's at 9%.
Yes.
Which is pretty impressive for a guy who's never done it. How come?
Well, let me tell you about my wife. My wife is a lawyer, and aside from that, she's very bright. Very bright.
Nice.
And she loves him. She adores Ben Carson.
What's he got?
Ben Carson has a human touch and an insight into what ails America and a serious desire to break down barriers between black and white, left and right, and so on.
He is black, for those who don't know.
Yes, that's correct.
Marco Rubio, Republican senator from Florida, 10.3% as we move closer to the top of the list.
I have a lot of respect for him. On foreign affairs, he's magnificent. And remember, a president is mostly foreign affairs. Mm-hmm. And in the way our system works. He is someone to watch. He is a sort of Republican Hispanic JFK.
Great personal story, right?
Good looking, great personal story, young, articulate, smart.
Watch him.
Yep.
Scott Walker, governor of Wisconsin, 10.8%.
I had Scott Walker on my show. I don't tend to interview politicians. It's not the nature of my show. But I did interview him, and I was quite impressed. He did not have the staccato politician robot-like responses. He actually responded to questions. I was pleasantly surprised at his knowledge of foreign affairs. He's smart. He's courageous. He took on big unions, which are a major source of corruption, the government unions in the United States, because politicians give them what they want, and then they politic for the politicians. It's clearly...
Happens here, too.
How could it not? Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I'm for small government, because the bigger the government, the more the corruption.
Number one on the list right now, the brother and the son of two former presidents, Jeb Bush.
Well, let me say, and this is not fair to Jeb Bush, I fully acknowledge it, because he shouldn't have to pay a price that he did not sin for. The thought of a Clinton-Bush run makes me think that America is deteriorating beyond even what I worry about. This dynastic notion is very unhealthy for a country that prides itself on the individual comes from nothing and goes anywhere in life. Hers is pathetic. I mean, she was nothing more than the wife of a president. That is her entire claim to fame.
You're talking Hillary Clinton?
Yes. He at least was a governor. Not at least, that's a big deal. But so I started...
That's a bit unfair to her, don't you think? I mean, she was Secretary of State, she was a senator.
So what? She did nothing. She did nothing. See, what you are doesn't matter. What you do matters.
She did nothing.
You can be a father and neglect your children. Then you can't go around saying, look, hey, I'm a father of 3. Yeah, but if you've never shown up in your kids' lives, then you're a lousy father.
I get it. So you say she has nothing successful as Secretary of State?
That's correct. That is my view. Nothing. And the net result was a weaker America. There is more death on earth because of her and President Obama's foreign policies.
Than when George W. Bush was president.
Than when George W. Bush was president. Because when George W. Bush left the presidency, Iraq was pacified. Everyone acknowledges that, thanks to what we call the surge. And he left, and she agreed with leaving Iraq, where when America leaves, death follows. When America stays, you buy Samsung phones. American troops are still in South Korea since 1955. And look at South Korea today. There's a Samsung phone in my pocket, and I use a Samsung camera, and that was after Nikon and Canon. And look at North Korea, where American troops don't sit. It is the hellhole of the earth.
Okay, if you're being a tad unfair to Hillary Clinton, let me ask whether you're being a tad unfair to Jeb Bush as well.
I said I was.
Yeah.
I agree. I admit it. It's not his fault.
I mean, he is who he is, and the fact that he has the same last name as
But I
two
don't
other
trust him on foreign affairs, which is I keep going back to, because he's taken the advisors of his father, the George W. Bush the Elder, or George Bush the Elder.
George H.W.
Yeah,
Bush.
George H.W. Bush, and I don't. It's not a crowd that I feel comfortable with.
Can you talk to us a little bit, first of all, of that list that we've gone through here? Do you have a champion yet?
No.
What are you waiting to find out?
I'm waiting to find out how sellable they are. See, I could live with almost all of them, but if you don't win, it's quite irrelevant. So part of the question I have, the biggest is, can you win?
Do you see a winner amongst that group?
I see a few winners. Whoever will defeat her in the debates and not keep their gloves on because she's a woman, because the fear of you look like you're picking on a woman, which is so sexist nonsense. I can't stand it's the demeaning of women again. But in any event, that will be a big criterion for me.
Do you like the Republican Party today?
Well, when I joined, I was a Democrat. After all, I'm a Jew from New York and went to Columbia. I have every liberal credential. So, when you're a Jew in New York, there's sex male, although that's now changing, sex to be determined now. I'm serious. In New York, you can change the sex on your birth certificate. But they also had, this is not well known in Canada or outside of New York in the U.S., there was a place for a party. And it was filled in Democrat, because Jew in New York, Democrat.
You just are.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I became a Republican when Ronald Reagan ran to 1980. And for years I said there were two parties, the stupid and the destructive, and I'm a member of the stupid. I would say it's less stupid today. And in that regard, I'm more proud of it. I am proud of the fact that even the most moderate Republican voted against what we call Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which is turning out to be a disaster, as was predicted by Republicans.
It's not what Paul Krugman writes in the New York Times every week. Paul
Krugman...
he says it's actually working pretty well.
Yeah, well, he should visit Kentucky. The latest news from Kentucky is that hospital after hospital is shutting down because they can't afford to treat all the people who are coming in under free government health, formerly known as Medicaid, now known as Obamacare.
You don't think Obamacare has brought anything good to the United States?
There's no such of course it's brought something good. There are people who have insurance who didn't have it before. Every movement in history, including the most vile, did some good.
But on balance, you're saying...
Oh, on balance, it's been a catastrophe. Yes, that's what I do believe.
Why?
Well, without even the specifics of Obamacare, I am philosophically, because I think in practical terms it works, I am philosophically against having the government expand. I have a motto: the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen. And I do believe that, whether it's Canada, Australia, or at the worst, I'll be extreme, the Soviet Union. The bigger the government. As government gets bigger, the individual citizen gets smaller because it takes over more and more of your life. A third of Americans now receive money from the government. This was so not what Americans did. Americans took care of Americans through churches. It's the most volunteering society in the Western world, the United States. And that was our belief. Let me give my money to the poor through my charitable donations, through my volunteering work. When the government takes that over, it doesn't help anyone really. It seems to, but it's like a pusher. You feel better in the beginning, but not after time.
What specifically happened to the guy who was a New York Jewish Democrat to turn him into a California, still Jewish, Republican?
The biggest was communism. My bottom line in life is I hate evil. And I really do. I hate evil. And by evil, people, well, what do you mean by evil? And I always think, wait a minute, you mean, are you asking that for debating's sake?
You know when you see it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if communism isn't evil, then there's nothing is evil. Communism, Nazism, fascism, Islamism, okay? That's my list of the last 100 years. And the left went AWOL on anti-communism. They weren't pro-communist, but they were anti-communist. When Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, which should have elicited yawns from morally clear people, he was condemned by everyone from the New York Times to the LA Times. It was universally condemned. But why? They were harder on Reagan than on Brezhnev. Today they're harder on Netanyahu than they are on Khomeini.
The second president of your country, John Adams, said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Does that still stand up today?
That's, you took one of my favorite quotes from American history. The United States was founded on a proposition that was unique. Whether one agrees with it or not, it was unique, that the government should be small. We should maximize individual liberty. But the founders knew what I know, and what every religious Jew and Christian knows, and what everyone knew before the Enlightenment, that human nature is flawed, and I'm being very generous. I'm almost prepared to say stinks, but flawed. So how could flawed people have a good society if the state is not controlling their behavior? The only way is if I control my behavior by feeling that I am answerable to a just God and that I have a just system of ethics to govern my life. So it's entirely accurate what Adams said. That's why the bigger the government, the smaller the God. In Western, I'm not talking now in the Islamic world where they mesh the two, but in secular Europe, governments got bigger and bigger as religion got smaller and smaller. Somebody's going to have to control you. If you don't control you answerable to God and your religion, then you're going to have to answer to the government.
Are you concerned that on what seemed to be sort of the big, call them conservative, liberal, left, right, however you want to characterize them, issues of the day, the conservative side looks like it's losing on just about all of them? Does that worry you?
Yeah.
Why do you think you are losing on all of them?
Because it's very hard for people who are not raised with the belief that they have to first change themselves to grasp the profundity of that message. When John Kennedy said in 1961 in his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," that was classic liberalism, which is what I still love. But right now, it is the opposite. Ask what your country can do for you. When you raise a generation with that belief, what can you do for me? I'm going to vote for the person who takes care of me. Why do single women have such disproportionate votes for the left? Because the left says, we'll take care of you. You don't need a husband. Do you know that married women with children are just as Republican as white men? And it doesn't matter generally what the ethnicity of the woman is. If she's married and has children, she votes Republican. Single and children, the most Democrat, because they will take care of me.
This evokes a bit of Mitt Romney's 47% line.
Well, that was a stupid line.
Yeah, but his point was that if the government is basically putting a check in 47% of the pockets in the United States, Republicans aren't going to get those votes.
Well, right, but it was a stupid line to say it the way he did, knowing that every word he would say is quoted. But he said so many few foolish lines, given how long, and it's ridiculously long, the American political process is for president. I don't hold it against him. But anyway, he was caught on that line, and it sounded worse than it is. But that's right. That's the reason that the Democrats want to give more and more people money, because it's really paying for votes.
But you're talking economic issues, and I'm also thinking of I was thinking of social issues as well. Whether
social
it's
issues?
Gay marriage or euthanasia or abortion or capital punishment. The conservative side in the United States at the moment seems to be losing the debate.
I agree with you. Losing doesn't mean you're wrong, but losing, that is correct, yes. Because it sounds, the default position in America and in the West today is liberal or left. That's the default position. You know, what do I care if two men love each other? Who am I to say that's not a beautiful love? I don't say it's not a beautiful love. And in my own extended family are two women who are married, and they have two kids, and I love those kids every bit as much as I do any of my other nieces and nephews, et cetera, et cetera. But I am against the redefining of marriage because, among many other reasons, and it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. Marriage equality fits on a bumper sticker. To say that we haven't been wrong for 7,000 years in society by having marriage defined as male-female takes a lot more than a bumper sticker. And the biggest problem is what it announces is gender doesn't matter. And this is what I really worry about. We are playing with the next generation in the Western world.
Or society has the right to redefine how it sees issues.
It has total, yes, but when it's funny though, we can't though. We can't define in California through Proposition 8 how we define marriage. You can only define if you're on the left. You can't define if you're on the right.
Is that the bias of American culture, American media, American government, American, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, that's correct. As I say, that's the default position. That is the only way. The only way you're taught. How many conservatives are invited to give commencement addresses at U.S. colleges? Virtually zero.
You have?
Nope.
You've never been invited?
Nope. Oh, there's worse. Well, I've been invited. Yes, Pepperdine University, which is a Christian-based university, and I was given an honorary doctorate of laws. That was it. And once, many years ago, because the man knew me, University of California Irvine Medical School.
But you're waiting for NYU or Brandeis.
No. But that was two in 40 years of public life. And I asked Charles Krauthammer, who is a major intellect. He's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist,
lived
among
in Montreal
other things.
for a while.
Yes.
Canadian connection.
And he always makes that connection. He was invited here to give a commencement address. And in his entire career, not one American university has invited. They've invited basketball players. They invite comedians, but they have never invited Krauthammer.
So Canadians are more open-minded than Americans.
Or Krauthammer doesn't trigger the same reaction among Canadian liberals that he does among American liberals. I think that's the fact.
Okay. How am I doing on time, Control Room? I want to go on, but I got a feeling I got to let you go. You got an event tonight I got to let you go to.
Well, I would love to come every time I come to Toronto.
You know what? Can I get that in writing right now?
I would
I'd love to have
happily
you
do
back.
that. No, you're a terrific host. I'd be very happy to do it.
You're very kind. I've enjoyed your radio show for many years, and I hope you will come back and see us again.
Your listeners would love PragerUniversity.com. 5 minutes with the greatest thinkers in the world.
Awesome. Dennis Prager, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, columnist, author, public speaker. Great to have you at TVO tonight.
It was great. Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.